Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke, ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and we have two other hosts this week to help discuss Zack Snyder's latest in the Netflix Snyderverse. First off is an exile himself, someone from the Ronin console, Millennial Mike. Welcome on, Millennial.
Let's get into it. This is I'm very passionate. So I'm excited, and let's just, yeah.
I think I picked I 4D chessed this. I did, all right, we need a dissenting voice, and then we need a positive one, and let's see if I nailed it on this one. Another rebel on here, someone who's big on Star Wars, big on comic books, big on superheroes, big on Zack Snyder as well. It is Matt. Welcome on, Matt.
I'm looking forward to getting into it. It's been a while, and I may be that little bit more critical voice. I don't know.
Oh, maybe I picked wrong. I've got two.
We'll find out. We'll find out.
But today we are going to do, this episode is inspired, of course, by the release of Netflix's Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, which currently is the #1 movie at the time, a couple days ago, in over 61 countries. I'm now seeing over 90 countries, the #1 film. It stayed at #1 through Christmas Day, and 2 through 5 were other Christmas movies, like The Grinch and all these other Netflix Christmas offerings, and Rebel Moon stayed at #1. Therefore, it is officially a Christmas film. But the way we're going to break this down is we're going to go with our brief thoughts for each of us. Then we'll go into what we did not like about the film, what we did like about it, and then we'll talk about the future of Rebel Moon, which does include the Snyder Cut of it, the R-rated cut, and then, of course, Part 2, Scargiver.
And I will keep killing until every mother weeps tears of regret for ever having come to the mines of Daggis.
So let's start off with Millennial Mike, brief overall summary on your thoughts of Rebel Moon, and then we'll dive into the whys.
So I was very excited about this movie. And the reason why I was excited about the movie is because my favorite elements of Zack Snyder are oftentimes served by more high concept and oftentimes sci-fi-esque kinds of movies. So like Watchmen and Man of Steel, and even Sucker Punch has kind of the more high concept, like out there fantasy sci-fi kind of elements to it, right? Even though it's not totally that. But so I like that because it allows him to delve into certain kinds of topics and themes in the way that I believe he knows how to do best. Very deeply, multifaceted, multi-layered. You can watch it multiple times, get a lot out of it, a lot of meaning to it. Lots of symbolism, and it's kind of just infinitely rewatchable. Now, this movie, I feel, has everything that a lot of people know about Zack Snyder in it, including both his promoters and his detractors. Mostly from a visual standpoint, I think that it is very Zack Snyder, and the ways that everyone loves to love him and loves to hate him. However, I think that it's lacking some of the things that fans like myself have spent countless tireless hours defending him for. And that is the concern that we will surely go into.
Nice. I like it. Already have lots of questions. And how about you, Matt? Brief summary, what you thought of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire.
Also very much have been long looking forward to this just to see what does a Zack Snyder rejected Star Wars pitch look like? Was said that he pitched a Star Wars story, a more adult take, and he certainly delivered his vision of it. And maybe I'm not the more critical voice at this one. I enjoyed it, but it's much like Mike said. There are detractions in there. I think it's better than Sucker Punch overall, which I think it was. That movie was pure unfiltered Zack Snyder, and I did have some trepidation with it just because Zack is better. His better movies have been adaptations of other material that he's brought his own spin to. His original material, I felt like he might be trying to do too many things. Instead of like, I think he's great at someone giving him like a coloring book and he will stay within certain boundaries, but create like masterpieces within those boundaries. When he gets to do his pure unfiltered self, I think he gets a little too indulgent. And I think this movie suffers a little bit from John Woo syndrome, in that if you cut out all the slow-mos in the movie, this movie's an hour long. But that said, it's giving us scale and characters that we normally just see in the movies we don't normally see as a made-for-streaming movie. I thought you definitely see the Star Wars influences. You see a cantina, you see the archetypal characters, and if you see those influences, then you see George Lucas's influences from Akira Kurosawa films. So it's definitely not just Zack's giving his take on Star Wars. He's giving his take on these types of movies and genres. Overall, I think it's good. It's very much, I was expecting like an original story in the Star Wars universe, not something that is very similar. That's like slightly zigs where the original Star Wars zagged. But, I'm very much looking forward to see what part 2 is going to give us. And I think he swung for the fences, and maybe the director's cut, the longer cut that we're going to get in a few months, fleshes things out a little bit more. I thought it relied a little bit too much on exposition, a lot more. Could use a little bit more show than tell.
On my end, of course, on X, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, I am championing the success of this film because I do think something original like this should be celebrated, and I think there's a lot to celebrate in the movie. I like Zack, I like the crew, I like the actors that are involved, and most importantly, I feel like I want to reward Netflix for simply acting as they should, the way Warner Brothers should have been in treating their crew and staff the way they should be, and also putting their weight behind this movie and this project. So online, I'm extremely positive here. With the Brokehead Core, I can be I can give my full thoughts on it, and I'm grateful for that because the Brokehead Core understand that some of the ways that we look at movies, especially some of the long-term broquettes, so I can go into some of the critical things without someone thinking that I hated the movie. So I thought it was visually striking, like Matt was saying. It was an experience that I think is larger than Netflix. I think it would play amazingly in theaters, and hopefully the success of Netflix will give it an even larger limited release. I would like to see it on the big screen. I think some of the special effects did look a bit unpolished, particularly, and we'll get there, but like the first flight scene that we got with the Griffin, there were some moments there that looked a little bit off. The characters were compelling and I like them a lot, but I feel like the Snyder Cut of this would really do them a lot more service. I think that we need to see more of their background to truly flesh them out further, and I think that's something that we needed more of. And the choreography, I think we've seen, I don't know if he worked with the same crew as he did on BVS, but I felt that it felt just short of what we've seen from him before in movies like BVS or the rumored Wonder Woman that he may have had a heavier influence on. Otherwise, the acting was great. His cinematography was amazing. Of course, Zack does what he does. And overall, I thought it was a pretty incredible watch. So here's where I think we can go into what we disliked about the movie more specifically. And I think we all might have the same things that we liked and disliked. So I feel like we should all cut in and jump in whenever we agree with some of these things. But just to kick it off, Millennial Mike, I know you're going to have some heavier criticisms with this, and I think that's great. I think it'll kick off some great discussion. So please start us off, because I'm sure we're going to agree on some of these.
Well, first and foremost, I want to preface this by saying that I had this deep gut instinct to defend Zack and to apologize for him. So I'm very biased. I'm very partial in that way. However, I'm actually fighting against those tendencies to tell you what I believe is the truth. And to what extent his detractors are onto something, and to what extent I believe that they may not be onto something, or even to the extent that they might be speaking in bad faith, which a lot of times happens with Zack Snyder.
Yep.
I'm going to try to, this is probably my most scathing review for a Zack Snyder film, and I'm trying to make it as good faith as I can, but I don't want to like water it down necessarily. My biggest criticism of this movie is its existence. This movie shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be a PG-13 version of this movie. So imagine this, right? Zack is uniquely aware of what happens when he's forced to cut down and pare down his work, right? We all were there defending Batman v Superman, the theatrical cut when it came out. And then we defended it again when the extended cut came out because, you know, under the pretense that he was taken advantage of by the studio, or he was urged, pressured, forced to cut it down for time's sake by the studio, and that the extended cut was so much better. Now, this is the thing. I actually really liked the theatrical cut. As a matter of fact, I've been on record saying that I prefer the theatrical cut because I believe that the benefits you get from the extended cut do not outweigh the extra time that it takes to fill in the gaps or whatever. Like the extra scenes that some people will say that they absolutely need, I don't. Like I can fill in between the lines. But with this movie, I don't feel like that was really the issue. In BVS, both versions, a lot was happening. Nothing happened in this movie. This is literally a ragtag team of, you know, miscreants and rebels getting grouped together. And people say this is like has a part one syndrome. That is, I don't like that terminology. However, if I'm being very honest with myself, I think if I'm trying to translate what they're trying to say, what they're trying to say is that it feels as though the movie, because like, you know how some franchises, and please cut in if I'm going on too long, because you know how I like to wax poetic, but but some franchises will like, they'll split their last movie into like two films just for the heck of it. Right? Like, you know, what was it? Divergent was going to do it before I canceled it. Hunger Games, the Maze Runners. Actually, they didn't do it on those, but they
started with Harry Potter when they realized they were running out of Harry Potter books to adapt, and then it cascaded from there.
Right. So what I think people are saying with this movie is that this feels like a movie whose its whole purpose is to set up something else. And I agree. I agree with that because, and this is the thing, I wouldn't have a problem with that. There's a lot of movies like this that are just so freaking cool that I'll watch them gather all these legendary heroes together. Right. But I didn't think it was that cool. Like I liked a lot of the shots. Zack Snyder always knocks out of the park with his cinematography, his visual design and symbology and all that. But I wasn't like just flipping out over the scenes. I didn't get that amazing heart-stopping feeling where you're just like, oh my God, this is like peak Snyder.
Not even like the backdrop opening scene of Kora against the planet or the Griffin scene, first flight. So maybe we're just used to greatness from Zack, that we're just like, oh, this is standard Zack.
I mean, okay. So do you remember when, remember in the Batman v Superman trailer where you see Batman, he like swings up against a building and then a big laser beam and then he like swings away from it?
Yeah, it recreates the Dark Knight Returns cover.
Yes. I was like, what is, and then the lightning, I was like, what? Oh my God, what is this? I was like chills, right? This is cool. It's really cool. As a matter of fact, let me get this out of the way. I have like a bunch of notes and stuff I want to talk. I don't want to take over everything, but this is a great movie and it's better than most things, period. Right. Mm-hmm. But it's if this weren't a Zack Snyder film, I wouldn't be talking about it. So that's my concern. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't even tell anyone, hey, I watched this movie. You should check it out. I wouldn't even do it. The only reason why I'm doing it is because of Zack Snyder and because I'm really interested in him and his projects. But I, you know, maybe give me something else to kind of bounce off of. But I mean, I have more to say. I want to talk about the creator and how I feel like that's a good analog for this movie, because I think that the creator also falls in a lot of different ways. I told you earlier about how I think that this movie should never have been created. Oh yeah. So
yeah, let's talk about that part, because the PG-13 versus R, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like when the Snyder Cut comes out, I'm never going to go back to seeing this one. I feel like this one is so surface level in the storytelling, even though it's setting up this brand new universe, which is, great and all. But when I see the Snyder Cut, which I assume is going to have a lot more exposition, a lot more, like when you first run into Nemesis, she's just there in the elevator. All we know is that Kai was like, "Oh, she's on this planet," but he doesn't say that he
apparently
knows
she
where
lost
she
her
is.
kids or whatever. The scene where you see her family get killed. Like you just know it.
Or when and when they find her, because I guess there's a scene in the trailer where they're in a noodle shop and she's there. So there's things
all the
like
emotional
that.
connection, just straight slap.
Right.
Imagine choosing to subject your work to that. And when if you listen to his interviews, if you read his interviews, which I've done, I haven't watched criticisms, but I've been trying to get as much of Zack's perspective to see what he was thinking. I think what basically happened is that Netflix offered him the option to say, listen, we want you to make your project.
Mm-hmm.
However, we're not going to throw all of our money behind it. So while we're allowing you to make your project and we're going to put that in the deal ahead of time, we're literally going to do what Warner Bros. Or any other studio probably would have done to you. We're just going to guarantee you'll get a director's cut. And because we've known about the director's cut, we're stuck in the situation where it's like, we know that we're not getting the actual movie and we know we're getting the BVS theatrical cut in advance. We know that that's what we're getting. So it's to defend this movie, knowing that there was a full, because even when I watched BVS, I love that. I didn't know that wasn't the actual movie.
Mm-hmm.
This I do. And yet I'm supposed to defend this movie as though it's like peak Snyder. It's not. It isn't.
I think the Snyder Cut will be, but I do like that the theatrical one, and I don't know if I would love to ask Netflix this, if they learned some kind of lesson after that Scorsese 4-hour movie came out, The Irishman, if there was something there that made them go, oh, we probably should have done like a shorter version of this to release. I don't know if their metrics said that people didn't stream through all 4 hours or whatever it was.
What was the Tarantino movie in the cabin?
I forgot what that was called.
Yeah,
it's not the Magnificent Seven or something.
It's very similar. You have like 7 people that are in a cabin. It's a kind of a Western sort of thing. But yeah, they split that.
Hateful Eight.
That's
Hateful Eight. Yeah, so they split that into 4 parts. There's a 4-hour movie. They split in like 4 movies on Netflix.
That probably could have been an option too. And I don't know. I would love to have seen the discussion if Zack was a part of that, and maybe that was a suggestion. I don't know, but I'm with you as far as, to me, this cut will not exist because the Snyder Cut, I'm assuming, and I know I'm going to get more from that world from that, so there's no reason for me to go back to this theatrical once March comes about. Now, what do you think, Matt? The PG-13 versus R, I mean, do you feel like they should have made a shorter one, or what do you think on this?
I think it's very confusing marketing. Anyone who knows Zack Snyder or knows anything about any of his work, we all know that we're all waiting for the longer cut. That said, I've heard the criticism of part 1 syndrome, and I would argue that it's really part 2 syndrome, and that The Matrix 2 or Back to the Future 2, it's middle chapter syndrome, and that the middle chapter of those movies exists simply to get from part 1 to part 2. Part 1 syndrome, a good part 1, is a story that can stand on its own. Mm-hmm. And this
Great
one,
point.
it and like Star Wars: A New Hope, it's the only Star Wars movie that can exist on its own. Everything else that's before and after that, connects to something else. That one was a huge risk. It was made not knowing if there was going to be another one. And you can tell when a movie is made that they know there's going to be something else coming. And that's what, how this movie ends. Like, if you're making it for mass consumption movie, it needs to end in such a way that it should be a satisfying experience. And with as exposition heavy as this was, I'm really hoping that the longer cut isn't even more exposition heavy.
I was trying to articulate that. I so appreciate you bringing out that part 2 syndrome, because I remember I was trying to say about how they split the last movie of a franchise into 2, and then you have that kind of transitionary movie where it's literally just to set up the final movie. That's what this felt kind of like.
I think, I agree with that. I think that Zack, he wants to make episodic storytelling on like blockbuster scale, and I applaud that, and you can see that. That said, I wish he was making like a series of like, this was like a series with this kind of budget, like a Game of Thrones like level budget, with you're telling like, a 10 episode story, something along those lines. Cause I feel like for the gathering of all these characters, I half of them I barely know. And I feel like, obviously, like you said, like with Nemesis, we're definitely going to get more backstory with her in the extended cut. But when like that extended cut comes out, I don't think I'll go back to this for the mass one. This is almost like a preview for what is for the real movie.
The pacing on this movie as well actually lends itself more to like a TV show, because it feels like every time they gather a new character, it's like an episode.
Yeah, they could spend an episode on each planet that they went to.
Well, right, and there's so little connecting the moments from one character to the next that it really doesn't feel as though it's all one movie. It just literally feels like they're okay, like time to do this, cut, time to do this, cut, and then you do it like 7 times basically, and then there's a breakup in there a few times when they're gonna cut over to the bad guys, and also sometimes for like a flashback. There's like 1 or 2 flashbacks in there. But for the most part, it's really just, and again, maybe the longer cut pads this out. We need to spend a whole section of this conversation just talking about how they could have made this work, if it's even possible philosophically to make something like this work and still be a work of integrity, which, as you know, we've always been talking about artistic integrity, how important it is. And I think this is probably the greatest affront to that idea that he's ever been involved with.
So my biggest criticism over the career of Zack Snyder, as visionary as he is, and there's no mistaking a Zack Snyder movie. Like you can look at like one frame, it's a movie that he made. My biggest criticism is that he's not great at economy of storytelling. Like if there's a way to pad out the story and let you enjoy and just simmer in a scene, then, one, that's great, because, filmmakers like Scorsese and Tarantino, like they do that kind of stuff. Spielberg does it. They do that, but they also know when to cut and move on to the next scene. And I feel like he can tell the same story effectively, and doesn't have to be 3.5 hours. If there's anything that I'm gonna diverge on the BVS take, is that I think the director's cut was better. I think the director's cut of Watchmen was better. I think basically the director's cut of everything that Zack Snyder has done is better than what we get. But that said, there are other filmmakers that are in the visionary camp that are able to cut their movie down to a digestible, 2.5 hour, 2 and 3 hour, 2 and 3/4 hour experience, and still tell an expansive story. I mean, the original Star Wars is great at world building, introducing characters that you get to know and sympathize with, and you get that in less than 2 hours.
Yeah,
not to say that Zack should play by those same rules.
No, I agree.
It can be done.
I actually, no, I mean, I have to think about that before I can fully adopt that viewpoint, but I can totally see where you're coming from. And I've had complaints about Zack Snyder's Justice League, is that like, okay. And that's another thing that, man, I'm trying to think, where do I want to start? Okay. So Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I'm talking about this because of the philosophy of what it means to have agency over your own work and choose what you want to be in the movie, and how directorial freedom, changes the final product, right? So, okay, Zack had freedom after the movie was created. What did he do? He added more, not just what he would have originally done, but he added more into it. And I feel like a lot of the arguments that people, from what I hear, just through the grapevine, is that he put too much in this movie. And while I hesitate to just jump and believe that, if I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of like, okay, whenever Zack has the opportunity, he's always trying to add more. And the fans are always like, yeah, add more, because we're just happy to see more of it. Mm-hmm. But it's like, I feel as though like that isn't always what we need, because like we're either going to get, it seems like, a cut down, neutered version, like where there's nothing happens, like Rebel Moon, or we'll get this directorial cut of like Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's 4 hours, and while there's a lot of good content in there, I feel like there's a version that's just as good, if not better, of that movie that isn't as long as that movie. To kind of lend to what you were saying about his storytelling economy.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. I don't know. I don't know what kind of cuts you could do to the Snyder Cut personally, but I don't know. Those hours go by quick for me. I love every scene in that movie, but I think
they do, but it's because it's episodic, and even
maybe that's why. And I don't know
and how we release that extended cut, he gives you chapter breaks.
He does do that, and maybe that could be why it doesn't feel as long. But I know I don't stop after any chapter. I just continue watching it. You know, it doesn't act like an episode for me.
But how many movies can you watch in parts? Like most movies, see, the reason why I like movies at all and why I continue again and again to promote film and cinema over televisual and episodic content as the prestige format is because of the pacing and the idea of getting one story arc in one go, large scale, as opposed to giving these little vignettes. You know, I mean, look, listen, TV shows are great for their own purpose. As Martin Scorsese says, that's one thing, but cinema is something else. And I feel like with Zack Snyder's Justice League, it kind of played into that kind of more, because he split it up to be more episodic the way he did it. And also this feels very episodic in a way too. And I've always criticized, for instance, Marvel for making their movies like little TV episodes, you know, instead of actual movies, you know? So I feel like that's something that's kind of being lost here. And I think a lot of it has to do with the studios, what the studios want, not just what the directors are doing.
I think that once the Snyder Cut of this comes out, I think it'll better give me a picture of what they did with part one, what kind of cuts they wanted to make, why they made them. And for me, I think it'll play, honestly, I think Rebel Moon, this version the theatrical, whatever you want to call it, is going to play worse by the time the Snyder Cut comes out. I think it's going to feel like the movie itself will improve, not because in context fully when we get those extra scenes. And I think it's going to be one of those things I'd almost like to revisit, do a separate review of just the Snyder Cut of Rebel Moon and see how, if in any ways, portions of the movie get better or worse thanks to the extra scenes. Yeah. And you were talking about the recruitment of characters. I think that's one issue I had. I don't know if you guys agree with me on where it felt too easy to convince them to join the team. It almost felt like I wanted more push and pull. Like, for example, when General Titus, they're talking about him and like, there's a head on a stick for any warning to even approach him. And I'm like, oh, they're going to really have to fight to try to find this guy. And they found him in an alley. He's drunk. Yeah. Sober him up and convince him to come along. Like, I don't know. I felt that with all the characters, it was a little too easy to convince them to join the team.
See, this is the thing. I agree with you guys, but this is what I don't think that your guys are willing to do. And what I think I've had to work up the gall to do is to just blame Snyder. I think it's Snyder's fault. My man Snyder did this. I hate to say that, but okay. He came to Netflix and said, here's my idea. They had some discussions like, okay, listen, we need a PG-13 version, something a little bit more accessible, but you can also do your thing. They had all the chips on the table. They had the ability to write the script with all of these considerations in mind. Okay. Now we also have to consider that the script was already written. So maybe it was something that was already done. He kind of doctored it up. But the point is that Zack knew what he was getting into. And with all of this knowledge, he thought that he could make a project that was cut down and that would still be fully and wholly, it'd be a complete work in this format. I mean, I think that what happened was Netflix says like, listen, we really don't want to do this unless you can make this for us. But Zack still agreed to it. And I feel like because of that, I can't blame Netflix as I blamed Warner Brothers for the egregious stuff that they have done. So
no, I don't blame
you guys agree that?
Yeah, I don't blame
Zack.
I don't blame Netflix either. I mean, it's obviously Zack put this together and did it. But at the same time, he's not going to say, look, the 4-hour or 3.5-hour version is my version of this movie. He can't say that. Like, he will not say that in this case because he agreed to these terms. And
why would he agree to it? I mean, it's gonna hurt Netflix's reputation. It's gonna hurt his reputation. Like, he needs more of that. It's going to hurt our reputation as Zack Snyder fans, because now we have to go harder in the paint for something that really isn't good.
Well, so far it's working out. People are, the general audience is watching it over the Christmas films. They're loving this accessible version. They're watching it. And then when the Snyder Cut comes out, I feel like that's honestly when I'm going to be like, that's the movie right there. That's the complete version. I mean,
so
it's working out, right, man?
Snyder said, well, yeah, it's getting his name out there and getting into consciousness. I did read an interview where, Snyder did say that this is the first time in his career where, usually he's making a movie and the studio says, okay, you've got to cut it down to this. And he has to subtract from that movie, which makes his, in most cases, in my opinion, the director's cut better because that was the original vision. In this case, he said that that this is the first time where he is taking the same basic story and consciously making two different versions at the same time. So it's not like he's taking his director's cut and he cut out scenes to release this mass one. He thinks that this is the mass one that if it were released in theaters would have been, that this would have been Star Wars.
Yeah.
And so that's where I get to it, like his economy of storytelling, of that. If this was not on Netflix and this was released in theaters, it would have been the visuals would have been talked about. The scale would have been talked about because it's a little bit, the design of it would be talked about. It's a little bit Star Wars. It's a little bit Dune. It's a little bit Warhammer 40K.
Even like Ghost in the Shell kind of times too.
Yeah, you see the influences of what he's what fed his story. You see him everywhere. The movie wears it on its sleeve. That said, this isn't a cut down version of that. This is something he consciously built into what Mike said. What Mike said is that this is his version. This is what he thinks the mass market would want. And it plays as an episode. And like I said, very episodic. It couldn't exist on its own. I think it needs all the extra material that's going to be in the director's cut. And that speaks to his inability to, or, I would say inability more as his self-indulgence in not being an economical storyteller. If you give him, if you tell him, okay, I'm going to give you 100 pages, he will find a way to make it 200 pages.
I'm with you there. I think it is on Zack. It's definitely on Zack. Unless we find out something, but as of now, I mean, Zack, this is on Zack. He did not make the best 2.5 hour version of his movie or whatever you want to say that he could. I think Matt is right, and so are you, Millennial Mike, where it is on Zack, and there is this inability or whatever you want to call it to make a shorter version of that film. It just obviously the longer one I think is going to be much better, but he was not able to make and he even shot alternate versions of the same scenes for the Snyder Cut. So he was shooting two different versions for two different films as it was being made. But when it all came together, I feel like because of that, there is a weaker product. There's there's definitely a lot missing, and I could tell when I'm watching it.
Yeah, I don't feel like you should go into marketing a movie already telling people that there's already a longer version of the same movie coming out in a couple of months.
They did that with BVS. They did it like not too long after BVS was still in theaters, and they said there was a better cut. So it chopped off and we all use that as a way to defend the already very decent box office numbers of BVS, although it probably could have been greater. I mean, I think we can agree with that. They probably, Zack and the whole team and Warner Bros. Probably wanted to do better than it did, but it did still do very well. But they did chop themselves off at the knees because of the whole director or extended cut at the end of the run. And I think they announced that earlier. Well, there was talks amongst us Snyder heads that they did that purposefully to set up a narrative that would later actually come to fruition in Justice League. But yeah, I think that the fact that he actually put this together and he chose this movie to be what he thinks that people are going to be fun and cool and it'll really get the masses are. Now listen, people are watching it. I can't deny that, but people watch Marvel movies and I completely rail against Marvel movies with no sympathy or anything. So it's,
Sure.
I can't just like flip a switch, you know. But what I will say is that I hope that this does teach. I hope that it teaches Netflix a lesson as far as, I think if they release the original version, because the question is, was Netflix right to begin with? Like, were they right to ask Zack Snyder to do this? I don't think they were. Like, for instance, okay, what if, so like with BVS, like, hey, we need to release this as a DVD release, a digital release, a home video release, and it's R-rated, although we all know it really didn't need to be, but it was, right? This movie is on a streaming platform, and a lot of people watch TVMA stuff on Netflix that wouldn't go see it with their friends or whatever at theaters. TVMA stuff does massive numbers, and I don't think it would be inhibited at all because of that. Not to mention, we're not getting a theatrical release, a cinematic release. So what this makes it feel like, we had to get the weaker version. We had to go through this whole double release situation. So we get the negative aspects of that, but we also get the negative aspect of not getting to see this movie where it belongs in theater. So it's like we have the worst of both worlds.
Well, when the numbers come in for the Snyder Cut of it, I think that's when we'll know if Netflix was right. If that version ends up being number one again, I mean, at that point, Netflix just quadrupled their streaming numbers, and that's what they like.
But if it is, then that means they're going to do this again. And I think philosophically, it's not the right thing to do. I don't think it serves. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, if they learned the wrong lesson from it, they screwed up. They can't do it with every director.
This is what I'm afraid of. Much like when you had, Harry Potter book 7 become movies 7 and 8, and then it was followed up by other franchises. I hope if all versions are successful, that this doesn't turn into Netflix recruiting a lot of directors and saying, hey, like marquee name directors, and say, hey, you can make 2 versions of your movie and we'll release them both. Have at it. And then
you have to make 2 versions of the movie.
And then, we're plunged into an era of everyone arguing over which version of a movie is the true version. I mean, Zack's already saying that like the alternate cut takes place in a slightly different dimension. So, they're saying that, okay, these are 2 separate continuities. So there shouldn't be any arguing, but there's going to be arguing.
Yeah. And then, it's not a good strategy at all. I mean, all I'm here for is the absolute best content from what I believe is one of the best directors. Mm-hmm. And he hasn't given me anything to work with. So it's like, listen, I can dismiss this and act like it didn't happen, but I'm certainly not going to defend it. I mean, I just can't defend it.
No, I totally understand it. I don't think we have been. Matt, what do you have on your end before we go to another point that Millennial Mike might have? Something that you think could have been better about the film, something you didn't like?
I feel like it's for a chapter that we're supposed to be able to like kind of sit and marinate and get to know these characters. I feel like I only know like 2 or 3 of the characters, and one of them ended up being killed. And are we giving spoilers here?
Yeah, I guess this is the spoiler warning. You should have seen Rebel Moon if you haven't, and you clicked on this and it said Rebel Moon review. But I guess some people do spoiler-free reviews. Millennial Mike just did one on Godzilla -1. So here's your spoiler warning. Go for it.
So like the Han Solo character played by Charlie Hunnam, the first one to kind of like sign up to, the Rebel Squad, the 7 Samurai, so to speak. Mm-hmm. He's the traitor in the group. He's just literally trying to gather the seeds and turn them over. He's the Han Solo in this alternate universe who turned he served Vader instead of and turned on everyone. So like that was actually generally surprising to me, which kind of like with how easy everyone kind of joined on, like, okay, there's going to be a traitor somewhere, but it came from the one who, was set up to be the Han Solo type character. So I thought that was at least a good point, because I was expecting Charlie Hunnam to be, 86th in the first part. It'll be interesting to see how much more of him there is, in the longer cut. And I think there's some good building blocks from these characters, but like, I want to know more. Like the Tarek, the person who tames that griffin,
Yeah, the main villain calls him a prince. And that's when I was like, oh shit.
Like there's more there that, that you hear like a little bits of dialogue. I think like Nemesis, it seems like it'd be the more interesting characters got like the least amount of screen time.
Nemesis is literally Katana.
Yeah, I did like though that there were casualties. Like I wasn't expecting, Ray Fisher showing up with. I wasn't expecting him to bite it, in this first chapter. So like there's a little bit of Saving Private Ryan. You get a little bit of hint that like in the R-rated cut, the director's cut, that there's going to be a lot more death, destruction. But then there was, I don't even remember though what happened to that one, stormtrooper, for lack of a better word, who wasn't in on like trying to defend that girl from being, raped by the other soldiers that were left on Vel. Like I don't even remember what happened to him. I thought he would have joined up out of all the people, and gone on that recruitment mission. Kind of
goes nowhere.
Yeah, it goes nowhere.
Also, listen, I want to say about the whole Ray Fisher's character, what Blood Axe character is called.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the thing, right? I endorse treating your characters as pawns in the greater story, right? Of course, you have to put everything behind every play you make. And I felt like his character was so thin that I was just, I didn't even like, I guess I was a little surprised that they chose to kill him, but that's as much as far as it went, like just kind of a little bit of surprise. Oh, okay. But it was a shame because I really liked his character and I liked his ethos, like his attitude. And I wish I could have seen a little bit more about it. So that way I could have felt a little bit more impact when that happened.
He stole every scene he was in.
Yeah, definitely. But I didn't get enough of it. It was only a taste. And I felt like if we got more of that, it would have really lended more to some kind of sacrifice in that kind of way. Because he barely even knew these guys. I mean, it's funny because he's been fighting on the front lines for however long he has, but he only gets killed minutes after he runs into the group. They call him to their little gathering to say, hey, we need your help. And he's like, okay, we'll help. He has a little speech. And then he, just like a few minutes later, Charlie Hunnam's character calls in what the King's Gate, which is basically this big ship with a turret. And he jumps up to destroy it, kill the guy in the turret and get shot in the process and then dies, But it just felt like there was a lot that could have happened. And it wasn't even like sudden enough to be shocking either. So it's not like a shocking death, but it's not an impactful one either. It's not like sentimental, nor is it shocking. It's somewhere in between that doesn't get to take advantage of either of them.
Yeah, I was more shocked by how quickly Ray Fisher exited than the character, just because of relationship
that's a good point
that Ray and Zack have.
Well, like, we know he's in part 2.
Well, probably is a flashback or something, maybe.
Well, could be.
Okay, well, and since we're still talking about spoilers now, I mean, now that you mentioned that, the door is open for him to come back because they already resurrected Noble. By the end of the movie, he was killed, and they brought him back.
Plus the little bird by the princess.
He wasn't dead, but yeah, this is what I'll say. I've always felt this way about every franchise, every director, every story ever. But Resurrection, you have to be very careful with it. As a matter of fact, you're probably better off not including it. And the thing is, they had this scene where it's slow motion scene where he's like, running up to sacrifice himself. You don't really even get to know him that well. So his death doesn't really mean that much to you. And then to bring that character back, it's not even like this sort of like, now it feels almost kind of like, we made a mistake. We need to bring him back because people wanted to see more of him, when you should have been more interested in the character for what he was in the beginning. I'm not going to let that slide. Like, okay, yeah, he's coming back, but through Resurrection, if this was Marvel, I would have torn them a new one.
And they also, I mean, outside of that Resurrection, they also left the door open with the little bit of like mysticism that they built in there with that princess who
Right.
Brings that bird, that bird back to life. Like, I don't think it's gonna be a surprise that she's gonna still be alive, or that somehow she passed the power to Kora, whatever. But like, or Kora was really her all along. She just remembers things differently. I don't know, but there's definitely some form of, like the Rebel Moon version of the Force is going to come into play in the second movie, or maybe even more in the alternate cut.
Yeah, they set that up specifically because I think we're going to get some kind of resurrected character probably after the battle in the second one where they defend the village. Maybe that girl that was going to get raped by the generals, some are thinking that she might even be the princess or might inherit those powers. So I think someone will be killed during that battle. She'll resurrect them, and that's how it'll be revealed that she's the princess or has the powers or whatever.
Oh, it'll be Kora who gets resurrected.
Probably.
Most definitely.
And that's when all the Jimmy robots will, I think it was Kelly that was telling me this after she watched it. She's like, that's probably when they're going to switch sides. Because remember, something in their programming says that as soon as she died, they knew she was dead, that they stopped fighting. When they see that the princess is alive or that she lives on and through someone else, that's when they'll join the fight again. And you'll probably see Jimmy start taking people out. But that's all obviously speculation. But
no, I have to say that whole standoff was amazing in the beginning. That was cool. Like, he fired the gun, not even like holding it at an angle. I was like, let's go. I like the fact that they treat him like a robot. Like, robots wouldn't even have to consider it was so intuitive and clever. Like, that's the kind of thing that I like to see, It was really cool. And
I wish he had come along. I don't know why he didn't.
Yeah. So that was cool. The fight scene. So do you want to talk? Well, I can talk about, how long do you have?
Well, we can go into stuff we liked and then, bounce back to, what did you like about it?
So the visuals are amazing. Music was serviceable. The character designs are amazing. Like, Nemesis is awesome. Like what is the Ed Screen's character?
Noble.
Nope. Is that what it is? Noble. Yeah.
General Noble or Admiral Atticus Noble.
Yes. Oh, Jenna Malone's spider character.
Armada.
Yes. Yep. So all the designs were just so well done. And I always appreciate how Zack Snyder puts so much detail, and he completely just puts Hollywood to shame with these, like, you see Marvel with all these crappy, like, cosplay minus level suits. And then you see like Zack Snyder with, half the budget make something so much better, more appealing, more grounded. Some people will say, oh, it lacks color. That's still bad faith, just haterade garbage. But
and practical effects on top of that.
Yes. And one concern that was allayed for me was the effects. When I saw the trailers, I was a little bit concerned that it wouldn't really all come together. And as time went on and I saw like some of the behind the scenes stuff, and then I actually saw the actual movie, it turned out really good. I'll say, like, there were some scenes where there was transition between live action, the actual actors, and digital, like, CGI assets. Like, for instance, what is the guy's name? You said it was like Tarek or whatever. Yeah, Tarek. He jumps onto the Griffin. So that scene where he hits the speed ramp, and he like comes to like the slowest point in the speed ramp, and then he like lands on it. Everything up to like right before he lands on it looks as amazing as it did in the trailer. But then when he lands on it, it's almost as though it's really weird. It's like he ran off a cliff, he jumped up to it, but then when they filmed him actually getting on, it was a cut and him like jumping off of like a 2-foot ledge onto it, like plop. And it just really like kind of cut that whole...
It didn't stick the landing.
It didn't stick the landing. It cut itself off of the knees. There was like some kind of jank between him and the CGI assets to where it felt like it wasn't just intuitive and just like synthesized. Right. And there were a few other moments like that too. I'm trying to remember
the Jimmy robot when it first came out of the box. Like when you first see it unfold, that was one bit that I'm like, okay, that doesn't look it's not polished. And then you see the zoom in on him and okay, that looks great, but that far off shot didn't look right.
The scene with him and the girl sitting down looked amazing. It looked, it was amazing. Like we're talking about, and that's why actually I wanted to bring up the creator, because the creator is this movie where it employs a certain element of CG that's pervasive, but it's also perfectly synthesized and everything else. Having that said, I feel like a lot of the issues with the creator are a lot of the same issues with this movie. Super toned down. They're both very like war and action heavy movies that feel like there should be more conflict and action than there actually is in the story. The story feels a little bit empty and light. And it seems like what a lot of the detractors say, style over substance. But I would just say, I wouldn't even say style over substance. I would just say style without substance, because I don't think that the style comes in spite of the substance. But yeah, there's a lot of great things to enjoy about it from like a technical aspect. And there was some jank here and there.
There was also like the tentacle scene where with Noble's character when he's doing, I don't know what he's doing with those tentacles and on board a ship where like they were there was a lot of jank there where he's just being wrapped around by something that is definitely not there.
Yes.
I did notice that a lot of the things that the CGI bits that did look off, it reminds me of like when you're watching a big special effects heavy movie in the theater. And these are things that you're not necessarily seeing because it's moving at a different frame rate than you're watching it on a TV, a different refresh rate, and how like some effects, there's some dissonance is more obvious on TV than it is when it's projected on screen. And I feel like all, if not, most of the parts that were obvious to us would not have been as obvious on a screen, which, when you're making it for TV, for streaming, you're not making it for a screen. It's got to be rock solid. Otherwise, just don't put it in.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you mentioned. I was watching an interview with Zack, and he said that when he was making it, he did make it with the consideration that it was going to be watched streaming. And that made my stomach drop because it's like, that's not what I really, really want. Now, that isn't to say it isn't one of the best streaming made for TV movies that you'll see as far as visuals come to the fore. But yeah, that kind of concerned me as well. I would have to, of course, see it in theater to see, how well it translates. But I think that just when you make a movie for a TV, you have a whole different set of considerations to make.
I like you brought up the soundtrack because there were parts, much like the movie itself, like it's a good summary of the whole thing. The visuals, some parts I liked, some parts I didn't. Story itself, same bit. Soundtrack also. There were parts that sounded amazing, and there were other parts that sounded incredibly familiar. Like First Flight, and I'm sure that was intentional. Of course, they did it almost exactly like the Man of Steel, like the drums, dun 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 dun, as he's taking off. And I get it, that's intentional. But there were some bits that I'm like, okay, that's an homage to that. That's fine. But there were parts that sounded like Zack Snyder's Justice League, and it's the same composer. So it almost felt like reused portions of it, slightly tweaked, slightly reworked. I almost would have liked it more. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but this seems to me more like a fantasy film than it does a sci-fi based on the story and context alone. It's almost like a fantasy film in a futuristic world.
That's where I say it's got it. I take the Warhammer 40K influence.
So I would have liked more of that kind of music to fit it into this fantasy world. And instead, it sounded almost superhero-ish at parts. Again, like the Snyder Cut in some parts. And I would have liked it to be a little bit more its own. Like when I hear this movie and I watch it, I hear the Snyder Cut in Man of Steel and I don't hear Rebel Moon. I can't think of a part of this movie. I can't go back to some parts of this music and think, okay, that's definitely a Rebel Moon song. It just wasn't there for me. So that's one part that I'm like, okay, I like the callback, but it wasn't wholly original to me.
Well, Man of Steel, incredibly original. It's got its own unique feel. And it really gives the movie a lot of identity. Batman v Superman is probably one of his best works when it comes to synthesizing his visuals and audio and the music together. I mean, just absolutely a masterclass, in my opinion. It's incredible. Zack Snyder's Justice League was good. I would say it's probably more like Man of Steel than it is Batman v Superman. This movie doesn't feel like it has its own identity when it comes to the music. I mean, it's fine, it's serviceable, but it doesn't really feel like it has its own like very strong identity.
I would agree with that. I think that my biggest criticism overall of the movie is that it feels incomplete, and it's infuriating that it's intentionally incomplete. And then, but what I do like about it is that, there's really not too many people, if anyone, that's really trying to swing for the fences in like the sci-fi fantasy category right now. Everyone's, if it's not, a comic book movie or, something that's a known quantity, studios are really not taking a risk on it right now. So I like that. I like that Netflix was able to, like kind of just open the coffers and, let him play. And they have obviously they have a good relationship with him. I do think there are things to like here, like, the lead character. I wish he would he would go back to having a cinematographer shoot the movie instead of him shooting the movie. Cause I feel like there's a few bits here and there where I'm like, I feel like things would have been a little bit different, a little bit more epic in scale if he'd used one of his regular photographers rather than it seems like he's learned from his other photographers over the years. He's trying to copy other cinematographers that he's worked with. I wish he would bring back one of his cinematographers.
It probably saves the budget though, which allows him to make it happen.
Oh, I'm sure it's not like bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but I definitely noticed that like there's a difference. He started it with Army Army
I didn't like it, but
and I know he's continued that with this. If it gets it, if that's what can save him enough money to get more out of it, cool. I like the like the robot. I liked that he was given the ability to swing for the fences.
Can we talk about acting? Mostly just because I've heard, like, actually I spoke to one of my friends who said that he hated the movie, but we actually disagreed almost on about a half of things, I'd say. But he said that the acting was terrible. And I didn't agree with that necessarily. I thought it was very serviceable. What did you guys think?
Overall, I think I liked it. Sofia Boutella has never really, she's been hard for me to swallow in some movies. Like the less she says, the better she is. She's
that's how Gal is too.
And it's not because of her, like any kind of accent or anything like that. It's just she's got a very, woman of few words look to her. I thought Charlie Hunnam was overplaying it a bit too much. Like he was a little hammy, which I feel like, okay, that was his version of Han Solo, so I could see what he was going for. I thought Anthony Hopkins' great voice work as Jimmy.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Tarek, that actor had presence.
Jenna Malone had a great few lines too in the lines that she did have.
And I like Jaimin Hansu in just about anything that he does.
Yeah.
And then Nemesis, I want more out of her, and it was a little rough having two women of few words or two characters of few words, and like it's like whatever Sofia Boutella's lines were, his Zack Snyder's was like, okay, let's cut it down by 75%.
Don't give the Mary Sue anything to write about.
Yeah.
Don't say anything.
I think there's a great cast overall. I wouldn't call a lot of the acting, wouldn't I? I am looking forward to more. I know it seems like we've been ragging on it, but like I think it's important that it's like that the people who do listen know that like we're not just going to cut Zack Snyder a blank check. Like if there's criticism to be made, there's criticism to be had. We just we're just so high on Zack Snyder that the expectations are enormous.
Yeah, and the way that we analyze these films are different than, what someone that's just watching, like a general audience member, not saying we're any better or worse than them, but we look at things a lot closer and we digest it. We like to dissect it. We like to look at it in different ways. And we've got honest. I think we've been honest with what we've said on here. Obviously, it would have been easy. There's a lot of Snyder fans that listen to this show, and a lot of them on Patreon, and it would have been easy to just be like, look, let's just talk. But that's not who we are. That's as we were going to be honest about it. And yeah, I do want to talk. And with that, I want to talk about that acting, because I thought Kelly when she pointed this out, I've seen this movie twice now, and Kelly has seen it once, and she pointed out some things with Kora, and she's trying to relate to some of these characters, and it's different, of course, with her being female and looking at the female characters. And she was like, I didn't like the main lead. And I'm like, oh yeah, how come? Tell me why. And she's like, well, she was this general. She had all these battles and went up in these rankings, but then you see her try to command the scene, like in the bar or when she's crying when Kai betrays them. And she's like, that's not general behavior. That's not a behavior of someone who used to be a general. If you're trying to get someone's attention at the bar, you're not going to, she was too soft-spoken is what she was saying.
I agree.
And she was a little too soft as well when it came to trusting Kai. And when it came to the betrayal and she's crying about it, she's like, that's not the ex-general, that's not who that is. And I'm like, and that's the thing. I'm like, the only excuse I can give for it is that she's trying to she's a different person than what she was, or she's trying to be. And I know in the sequel, she gets her general haircut again when it comes to defending the village. Maybe she becomes that again. I don't know. I can't give that excuse, but when she pointed that out, I definitely agreed with her. And the other bit of acting that I was like, okay, that's was that Marcus character that was shooting at Jimmy. And when he was like putting his thumb on the dude's name, on the other stormtrooper's mouth, and he's like, I'm going to tie you to a post and you're going to watch as I turn her into a whore. Like the way he was being, like having his arms swinging around. I'm like, come on, dude.
Yeah. Oh man.
But everyone else was solid to me. Like those were just some spots that were some blemishes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really rooting for Sofia. I want to like her character. I think that she did a really good job in the action scenes with the stunts and all that. I think that she has a good presence. She is quite small compared to the rest of the crew, but she really, you could tell she put in a lot of work. She looks great, and she really does the actual acting, as far as the stunts quite well. When it comes to the idea that, she's a hardened general for basically this Nazi army for years. And she was raised from childhood to be this. I do feel like there's a certain level of you can have that contradiction between her human side, her feminine side, and the side that was kind of broken down and rebuilt back in the image of the, I forgot what they call the army, but the bad guys, right? As she put it. But I feel like it wasn't really portrayed as well as it could be. Now, again, a lot of these, pretty much any of our complaints could be diminished a little bit with the second cut, but
that's the problem. Yeah.
That really is the problem.
There's a little bit too much of, well, let's see what the second cut brings us.
It shouldn't be that way.
We shouldn't be having that discussion.
No.
Yeah, and I think that's where the movie unfortunately fails, is the fact that it, as you were saying, it doesn't quite stand on its own because of that, and it might be perfectly serviceable again to a general audience, but yeah, I do. Oh, you brought up the criticisms. By the way, I liked Ray Porter's that little role in there is he gets killed by the Griffin. I was like, oh no, not Darkseid. Yeah. Even though he's supposed to be this despicable character, I guess they didn't really say Tarek owed him something. And then I was like, why are we supposed to hate this guy? Because I like Ray Porter, and so far he hasn't really done anything bad, except for Tarek's good girl. And it's like, why? What did he do to the Griffin?
Yeah. I was thinking that he didn't seem that slimy either. I don't know. It was weird. He was very reasonable with him too. He was like, yeah, if you could break it, I don't know. I was a little bit off put by that, but again, it could have been because of lack of context. I mean, I hate that I have to qualify every criticism I have by the lack of context. That's why this shouldn't even exist, in my frank opinion. I've already said that though. I'm sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I forgot where I was going. Oh, so the criticisms that others that you've both seen, whether it's from fellow friends or from what you've seen online or from some of these reviews, there's been, of course, the worst of the worst, this is a movie for the Snyder cultists, which shouldn't even be in a review, in a criticism. That's not a criticism. And then there's...
That's crazy, bro.
It's pretty bad. And then there's the, do you think that have you seen legitimate criticism to this? There's this whole thing where IGN came under fire over, and the rest of the reviewers at Rotten Tomatoes. I have to say it that way because when I say Rotten Tomatoes, people are like, they don't review things. It's like, no, I know that. But the critics were under fire because they were unfairly reviewing this film. And I think that the score, I don't think it should be a 23% or whatever it's at. And I also don't think it should be a 90% either. But have the criticisms that you've both seen, are there some that you think that this has been unfairly criticized for the wrong reasons, or rightly so? Things that you do agree that the critics have been saying about the film?
I don't think Zack gets reviewed as fairly as others because of the whole movement of the release the Snyder Cut, release the Air Cut, release, sell, license to Netflix, the DCEU. Like, there's so much notoriety around the treatment of Zack Snyder and his movies since Justice League, and that it's hard for a critic to be, unbiased against him. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of the reviews that I've seen snippets of, I wouldn't be surprised if any of them were, and like just rolling their eyes at, that people still saying we want like the Snyder Justice League 2, or we want more DCEU. And I think there's a general like disdain for anything of Zack Snyder. I think he's fighting an uphill battle, and he's not he's not a bad guy. By all accounts, like, he has a lot of talent. It's very loyal to him. The reports of how he treats people on set are very favorable. He's a nice guy, and he got dealt a raw deal that somehow turned into like, I don't think he's reviewed on the same level playing field that like, a Scorsese or Cameron or Spielberg and those others. I don't think he's getting the same fair deal. On the same token, sometimes movies that we look back at that are signature and groundbreaking sci-fi also weren't viewed that way when they first came out. Like, I was just about, entering adulthood when The Matrix came out, and The Matrix got very middling reviews by established critics. No one's looking back at The Matrix right now thinking about it as anything less than groundbreaking.
Yep.
The sequels you say what you want about the sequels. No one's looking at The Matrix now. And, if they look back at the reviews from that time, they would be shocked to see like it was getting like, B-, C+, like, ratings. And I feel like, a lot of these people who are trashing, who trash Zack out of like reflex, they're not looking at the influence that he has.
Yeah. And something also to note too is I don't think that criticism really means much anymore to most people. In fact, I think that the biggest talking points are actually going to be YouTubers and social media influencers, nowadays anyway. And a lot of things that I've heard be kind of like repeated kind of filters down through that channel. I listen to a lot of kind of like your geeks and gamers, your nerdrotics, your disparus, your, like that kind of crowd, right? And they're all completely just defecating all over Zack in this movie. Now, they have their own unique reasons not to dislike Zack, and they're not really so much coming from the standpoint of like, oh, we're like the status quo mainstream industry and we're trying to like gatekeep and like that. They have their own kind of beef against Zack. It's funny because it's like also the more mainstream is also railing against Zack. So I feel like Zack has somehow managed to garner the disapproval of all the powers that be. And it's really unfortunate because, I did see like a few like thumbnails and a few things like that. I've been purposely avoiding a lot of it, but he's putting these negative tropes in his movies, and he's he's doing the rapey thing again, and he's doing this again. No, he's so problematic. He's such a terrible person or whatever. And then on the side of YouTube that I'm watching, it's like, oh, look, he's doing it's Rey's Star Wars Skywalker woke all over again. It's like, okay, well, everyone is just a hammer. Yeah. And they're just looking at a nail. That's all they're doing. They're just using the same, whatever thing they have in their arsenal, they're just using it. It's like, listen, I was concerned about the woke thing, and I was also concerned about some of the mainstream criticisms that were had. But I don't think that people are coming at it from the right angle. In fact, I think some of the things that you were mentioning about Kora's character doesn't fall neatly into either one of those. Like, I think that he actually really managed to let Kora take licks, which is a big complaint from a lot of the people who dislike the mainstream, like Star Wars and that kind of Hollywood content. She takes plenty of licks. She gets beat down quite a bit. She has to like be tricky and sneaky and whatnot. She shows emotion. Now, if you're acting like great, I think it's okay. It's serviceable. So I think it kind of completely destroys that criticism from that side of the fence. And then on the other side of the fence, it's like she's in it at all and she's kicking tail. You know, it's like, come on, guys. It's like you're not being fair. Like, why don't you just use actual movie criticism to analyze this instead of this dumb, you know, whatever they do.
Yeah, the I don't know what you whatever you call that, but yeah, that's the funniest thing that people were pointing out on Twitter. Like, how do you manage to piss off both sides? And people were screenshotting things like, yeah, like you were saying, like the trope of like the guy that wants the alien guy that wants the people that they're saying he looks a lot like Joss Whedon, by the way.
Hey, I think we're just seeing what we want to see.
Well, we've got Jeff Johns there. We got Joss Whedon, Armada, literally.
Hey, where's James Gunn? Yeah.
So, well, he's in part 2.
He was already dead. He got killed in some back alley somewhere.
Could be. But yeah, it's amazing how, well, the one thing is you can give him is that people are talking about the movie. Both sides are talking about it. They're talking about how much they hate that it's successful because it's number one Netflix over 91 countries. And at the same time, something like Aquaman 2 is in a tailspin. And they're saying it's the second lowest DCEU opening. And it's like even the Zack Snyder haters, the antis, are watching Rebel Moon. Yes, they're doing it to hate watch it, but they're fucking streaming it. They're watching it instead of going and seeing Aquaman 2, which is what they were asking for. They've been asking for more light, more comedy. Why does it have to be so dark and brooding? Why is it so edgy? Well, there's your movie, complete fucking flop. So the thing that gets people talking is the thing that people are going to go and watch.
Yeah, that's the irony. I mean, and the thing is that part of me really wants, like, I get like a smile kind of splits across my face when I think about it, you know. But then at the same time, I'm like, okay, I want the best work from Snyder to do the best, so that way he can always stay as true to the best of his sensibilities, you know. And that's what I want. I want to promote the Snyder that I know and the Snyder that could be, you know. If this movie does incredibly well, and then the other movie with very little marketing just pales in comparison, but it has a very strong, you know, like, in other words, if the Snyder community really enjoys it and we talk about it quite a bit, maybe it starts to catch on, it'll just be another one of those things where we have to wait several years for people to look back and be like, wait, that movie was actually really good. And then I'm tired of that. Like, this shouldn't have happened. I'm a broken record, but
a lot of this happened because of the DC movies they were the overall, like, studio executives were trying to hold it to the same expectations of Marvel, where whether you like it or hate it, have been wildly successful. And now the first, I mean, they're having trouble now, but like the first, like 3-4 DC movies all had higher domestic ticket sales than the first 4 Marvel movies. Mm-hmm. So that by all measures, they were off to a bigger start. But
they started later.
They started later, and the Warner executives at the time were holding those movies to the same standard as Marvel, which was now like 10, 15 movies, 10, 15 movies in, rather than just judging it on its own, on its own terms. It now had to be measured just like, there was a time where like any animated movie, like its success had to be measured against whatever Disney was putting out, because Disney was the gold standard. So, if it didn't approach the success of a Disney animated movie, then it was a failure. And that's what the narrative became with the DC movies. And that's why we're having this discussion, is because it was being unfairly held up against Marvel. And instead of letting it be its own thing, it was trying to be its own, as unique to itself as the DC comics are, and separate as the Marvel comics and movies are themselves. Like the movies are a translation of a lot of the Marvel comics. The DC movies, when Snyder was over there, were, allowed to be more mature. And that's what I think, they were judging it against Marvel movies. They were judging it against Christopher Nolan, the Dark Knight trilogy, which was out, and so there was a lot being stacked against Zack that weren't like in his control at all. And unfortunately, like that's translated into like, this whole, there's always going to be a qualifier next to when you're trying to look, pick apart or analyze a Zack Snyder movie.
Before we go into the future of Rebel Moon, I do want to ask each of you, would you, without even considering the Snyder Cut, would you give this a thumbs up or thumbs down? And who would you recommend this to? Because I don't think this is I used to think like, okay, this is going to be good for Star Wars fans. And some Star Wars fans on X have been like, this is what Star Wars should be. And that's great for them. But I don't see it as something I would recommend to a Star Wars fan. Who would you recommend this for? So thumbs up or thumbs down? Let's start off with you, Matt.
I'm going to give it a thumb sideways. And so, like I said, I consider it an incomplete movie. I would recommend it to Warhammer 40K fans. I would recommend it to fans of more contemplative sci-fi, like Dune. It has a lot of like visual language involved with that. I don't know that I would recommend it to Star Wars fans because I feel like Star Wars fans would immediately, call out every shot in it that they said was taken out of a Star Wars movie. Never mind that was done in The Force Awakens and that George Lucas's original movies, had a lot of influences from Akira Kurosawa and other movies. Despite those influences, I would ultimately give it a thumbs up just because it's ambitious and it's audacious, but I have to give it incomplete until I see like the true version of it.
Millennial Mike?
Thumbs down.
There it is.
Yeah.
The prophecy has been fulfilled.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the first thing that anyone who hears that will say is like, oh, well, the new one, the director's cut. Okay, well, I'll give the director a thumbs up when that comes out. Right. This is getting a thumbs down. It's not the director's cut. It's different. So, also what I recommend to a Star Wars fan, I wouldn't recommend anything to a Star Wars fan. They're inconsolable. And, it's funny because after they recognized that they had been screwed over, which took them a long time, they latched onto the Mandalorian with Baby Yoda of all things. So if that's what they cheer for, I have nothing to do with them. It's like, I
think you said it where they're so desperate that like even that's just okay content. They're like, oh, this is amazing. And they'll run with it. I think that was you that said that on here.
And they just all they want to see, like anything that's in here is destined to be illegitimate Star Wars. It's all just a cheap, hacky copy of something else, like to a lot of those kinds of people. So unless you can like dress up these characters in the, the visual aesthetics of an actual Star Wars character and then throw a Disney Star Wars label on it, I don't think they're actually going to ever really truly accept it. They're not ready to move on. They want to complain about Kathleen Kennedy forever, which I get. I support that, but it's like they're inconsolable. They're in a rough spot. So I'll just leave them alone.
So who would you say this is for?
It's for people who still haven't moved on from the whole. I'm sorry, you haven't moved on, and you really want something from Zack Snyder, and you're willing to really get into this because this is your Mandalorian, basically. I would recommend that kind of person to simply reserve your judgment, stay off Twitter, go into the backlog, watch some older movies, enjoy your life, and then when the action movie comes out, watch it. You'll be so much happier. And this is coming from someone who watched Infinity War and didn't at watching a game to this day. It's like, that's all it needs to be, so I can skip things,
On my end, I'm going to give it a thumbs up. I did like it. So sorry, Bobby. I'm not going to watch those 3 DC movies. That was a little bet we had. I did enjoy it, and I'll keep watching this until the Snyder Cut version does come out. There's a lot more good than bad, even in this cut of it. Even in the things that I'm like, oh, we're missing so much here, so much lore. The things that I did receive, I really enjoyed, and I did like. And, you know, we talked already extensively on some of the things that we disagreed that did not work with this version of the movie. And I would recommend it more to like fans of Excalibur or like even the Princess Bride, like the main, I forgot his name, but he's in this movie
King.
as the king.
Mhm.
And so, or Robin Hood, like,
Cherry Elwes.
yeah, yes, that's him. And obviously, of course, the Kurosawa fan, I think, would take some out of this movie as well. And I don't know, the general audience, I would like to see what they liked about it, because I'm very curious. I haven't spoken yet to anyone that's more like take it or leave it type of deal. There's one of my friends, he's a Star Wars fan, and he watches a lot of sci-fi and some, but he's not like ingrained into what this movie is or what it means. It's just like, I like Zack Snyder, so I'm going to check it out. But he's not invested like we are. So I'm curious to see what he thinks of it when he sees it, because I think he is expecting a sci-fi film, and he hasn't seen it yet. So I'm going to talk to him this week and get his take. But yeah, that's what I would recommend it to right now. And I think the Snyder Cut I want to talk about that on its own when that releases. Part 2 is the Scargiver. That's where we're going to get the battle. They're going to defend the village. And I don't know if it'll set up a part 3 or future. I'm sure it'll leave it open-ended. But what are you hoping to see, or what do you expect? Maybe some more expansion on certain characters, certain action scenes, some loose threads like Matt was mentioning, the Stormtrooper. Jimmy is still on that village. What do you hope to see out of Rebel Moon Part 2, the Scargiver? Go ahead, Matt.
Just real quick to circle back on a couple things I
please.
said just to, after hearing your comments. I would always, thumb sideways and all that. And I'm going to call myself out here. I've always said that if your review of a movie isn't good or bad, it's just kind of in the middle, then it wasn't that good. So I'm going to call myself out and say that that's just my inner geek trying to find something to hold on to. And I will say that if the director's cut comes out and it doesn't blow my socks off, then I will have no problem not watching part 2 when that comes out, because it's got to improve what we saw. So what I want to see out of part 2 is I want to see like higher stakes. I felt despite them trying to stop this whole, or gather this team to stop the invasion of this village, like I need to see more stakes. You're seeing like stakes that are applied towards like a village, like there's a lot of people that you still don't really know, not like on a planetary or galactic scale. So I want to see Kora do more, speak less. And I expect to see, a lot more, on the fantastical elements of there they just brushed upon with the princess or Issa. But I want to see a lot more. I want to see a lot more action, a lot less talking.
How about you, Millennial Mike?
So the question being, what do we expect from the Scargiver?
What do you want to see out of part 2? Yeah.
So I have to kind of qualify the statement. I don't have this quite clearly down yet. So there's going to be a part 1 director's cut and a part 2 director's cut, or are they going to release both?
Yeah, they're doing the same with part 2.
Okay. So
4 movies.
So knowing that, I can't imagine that I would subject myself to watching part 2, the theatrical or the Netflix cut.
Right. I get that. Mm-hmm.
There's no way I could do that in good conscience. So it's hard for me to say what I'm expecting from part 2 because I feel like I haven't seen part 1 yet.
Right.
It's really hard for me to say. I don't know. I mean, anything that I want from part 2 could easily be in part 1 director's cut. And then having seen that, I'd have to then be able to say, like, okay, well, now I want to see it go, from here. But I don't know what to say.
This isn't part 1 syndrome. This is now like director's cut syndrome, something completely different. Like that's what they should have been pointing out, like legitimate possible criticism.
Yeah. It's really hard to say. And these movies are so different. Like imagine someone, I don't imagine this is going to be the case, but if they are in fact as separate universes as Zack is saying they are, you could actually get someone who really prefers the Netflix version over Zack's version.
Sure.
Which, I mean, that'll be weird, to kind of have those conversations. But
well, that's already been pointed out even on X, where someone's like, they announced, they're talking about the Snyder Cut of part 1, and they're like, okay, Zack was saying there's a lot more sex, a lot more violence, gore, described it almost as if it's from a different universe. And someone replied with, how come it has to be more sex, more violence? And people were like, there's literally a PG-13 version for you right now.
Yeah. Well, it's like whenever anyone throws a punch or like slashes someone with an axe or a sword or something like that, it literally just like kind of cuts right before the impact. There's like no like after effects, and even the sound sounds like it's neuter. Like you don't hear any sound that would like let you know there's impact or like that. It's really weird. It almost makes it feel as though like you question, like, did that actually, did they, what happened there? Like, you don't know. And then you're still thinking about that by the time the next scene comes along. It's really weirdly edited because of that. And I don't believe this movie was truly and holistically made. It couldn't have been. Like, how could you have made this version from scratch, knowing what you were aiming for, and come up with something like this? It feels like it was cut down.
For part 2, I hope to see more of Jimmy. I can't wait to see him truly in action, like firing guns and mowing people down. I think that's going to be a highlight of the film. The extra bit of blood axe that we get, whether it's a flashback or some kind of resurrection. There's rumors of Kai having a twin brother out there, and that's how they're going to, Charlie Hunnam's going to have more to do in part 2. And there's a lot of things that I want to see. I want to see this crew more in action. Like, I know we got some of that when they got released from the spider things. They were firing guns and stuff. And I want to see like each of them have their battle highlights. Like, I wish we would have gotten that in this. And I know we got that with their intros. Like, here he is taming a griffin. Here she is killing Armada. And there was some of that. Titus didn't get that, which I wanted to see General Titus more of that too. But I hope that in part 2 we get like they get to see more action. Maybe what Matt was saying, less talk, more doing. And I think we'll hopefully get that with the big battle in part 2. Whether or not they set up a part 3, I don't know. But I do want to see the connection to the Army of the Dead universe that he was talking about. The blue alien that is in the cantina, supposedly that's what they pull out of to make the zombies in Army of the Dead. Like, one of those is found by Area 51. They experiment on the DNA, and they unfortunately create that virus that we see in Army of the Dead, and that's why some of them have the blue blood. So I want to see that clearly in either the extended or in part 2, some kind of connection to Army of the Dead. If they truly are serious about connecting those franchises, I think I would be for that. You can do a lot with it, and obviously maybe even different time periods. But yeah,
enter the Snyderverse, huh?
Yeah, the Netflix Snyderverse version of it. And I more importantly, I hope that this, obviously Netflix is in the business of Zack. They've said it straight up that they want more Zack, and more Zack is good for them. And it's refreshing to hear that from someone as big as Netflix. I think it's been a while since anyone has I don't think even Warner Brothers ever spoke that highly of Zack.
Well, you had that one spokesman. That one spokeswoman from
You're talking about from Netflix?
No, from
Warner Brothers Discovery. Yes. She did do that. She said the phenomenal Snyder Cut, and that was, I think, before they decided to bring on Gunn and do whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we would have gotten there. I don't know if we missed something there, but
I just had to give her a shout out. She deserved it.
Yeah, she was good. So yeah, I mean, this is good for fans of Zack regardless, the success of it, and I hope that we make the Snyder Cut of it an even bigger success if it does deserve it, and if it is a better film overall. I think we should put that at number 1, and fully, regardless of how this might be one of my lesser favorites of Zack's films, I do still applaud the success that he is having with it regardless. I think that's a good thing. Well, I guess I should say, I guess if I were to split it in half of liked and most liked and less liked, it would probably be right on the bottom. It's just because, I'm comparing this with fucking Watchmen and BVS Ultimate Edition and the Snyder Cut. Man.
Yeah. I mean, he has a small catalog of very, very good movies. I mean, he has a lot of,
I think the future is bright regardless.
You wanted to talk about are we still going to talk about like the how well it's actually doing? You said you want to talk about like the numbers, something like that, right?
Yeah, so it's looking like it in over 91 countries. It's the number one movie on Netflix worldwide. It was number two in the US for like half a day, and then it bumped up to number one. So people are streaming it, and worldwide. That's what's most important, is that all these other countries, whether it's from Spanish or Middle, all of them are doing extremely well. It was number two in Japan. I don't know if it went up to number one. There was, I think, a Miyazaki film that was at number one at the time, but it is a hit for them. They're liking the numbers. I want to see what the final numbers are for it because they have their all-time streaming list or whatever. Army of the Dead, I think, is number 11 or something. Might be in the top 10 even. But I want to see how well Rebel Moon did, because number one on fucking Christmas Day is pretty insane.
I hate to say that my biggest reason for wanting to perform well and has less to do with the quality of the movie and more to do with all the Warner Brothers executives who are no longer with the company that ran them off just to eat shit.
Yeah, no, I definitely have that vindictive nature, that vindictive kind of side of me too, that wants that. I wish that I could have as much impact as some people put in a single snarky thumbnail, but I can't do that I can't express my actual thoughts and have that much impact. Like someone can like completely just drop, someone's expectations by just a headline or a YouTube thumbnail. But if I want to make a defense for that, I have to go, okay, well, here's how I'm going to preface this. And then I have to do this and that, it's just like a whole thing to it. Yeah. I want Zack Snyder to have his return, his return. And I want Warner Bros. To have their comeuppance for sure.
So everyone's in agreement. This is a good thing, regardless, that it's such a big success, even though we may not feel the strongest about Rebel Moon.
Yeah. There's good and bad to it. It's unfortunate. And even if there wasn't, or if it was a good thing or a bad thing, there's nothing I could do about it anyway. So it's not my fault. I can't do anything about it.
Well, guys, thank you for helping out with this review. Do we have any closing thoughts? Anything we might have missed that you definitely wanted to touch on as we close out?
I'm sorry.
My only thing about it is I wanted to like this more than I did. I didn't dislike it. But I also felt like there could be more, which again, as I said, is ultimately an indictment of the movie. If it couldn't make me feel strongly either way, that's the ultimate failing of the movie, is that it's either got to be so good it's great, or it's got to be so bad that it's still great because you can have fun tearing it down. And this just kind of like put me in like in the middling category. And I hope that when the full version, the true version of it comes out, that it's not just more sex and violence for sex and violence's sake, that there's actually like more story there, not just more scenery.
I agree. Actually, that's something that I want to bring out. That's a good point. And I guess this kind of goes into my expectations. I guess I didn't think about this until just now, but I have a few friends who I speak to in person and on like private chat platforms that a lot of them are very critical of Zack, but at least I can talk to them in a personal way where it doesn't feel, it feels there's more good faith there. And it's not like you don't have the same relationship you do with like, the critics or whatever, the bloggers, the YouTubers. But, a lot of them were excited that he was splitting his movie into two because they wanted a PG-13 version, right? They for I guess, I don't know, personal like reasons of conscience or whatever, right? So the thing is that, like, I want to be able to like recommend the director's cut to the kinds of people who I know and who I speak to, right? Because that's what I do mostly is word of mouth stuff or podcast stuff. I don't really care about like trying to advertise too much anymore, but I think that if Zack can prove that he had a really great script and that he had really great stories and characters, and that in order to anchor these characters, to ground them, to add this to the stakes, he had to add some more explicit content in there, it'd be a lot easier for me to pitch that. But if it's just like, oh, here's the edgy version of that movie that you didn't really like, and then that's what people run with when it comes out, that's not going to be good for anyone.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a film that will be talked about for just like Zack's movies, they're going to be talked about for many, many years. And it's only starting because of the extended cut and because of the part 2 and the part 2 extended cut. And I do want to also agree, Millennial, like it is tough for me to like now haven't seen, and plus the Snyder Cut coming out, if I do end up liking it even more, the only reason I will want to see part 2 is simply because I can't wait to see what happens, right? Would be the only thing, like just plot points is what I want to see part 2.
It's a different universe, Dan.
I don't, you know what? I don't even take that literally what he was saying. I think he meant like tone wise, or it almost feels like a different movie. I don't think it's a different continuity.
I think that's called cope. I think that he actually believes that it's so different that they're different movies, and that's what he meant. But we can have that discussion off the.
Listen, I'm totally down to revisit this discussion when the full version comes out.
The both, yeah.
And I can't believe the one thing that I left out about that I did like about it. This is a completely surface level thing that I always argued about with friends of who are Star Wars fans that love the prequels. I love the original trilogy. That's what I grew up with. But one thing that I did like about this one was that people wearing clothes, not costumes. In the original Star Wars movies, people wearing clothes, and everything else, it's been costumes. There's a slight difference between them. If you identify or if what I said resonates, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, I think we kind of lumped that into CG a little bit, but the character designs and the clothing, the sets, fucking incredible. Incredible.
The whole production value is very high. Yeah.
And the design, absolutely. Yeah, that could have been easily another 30 minutes, just the costumes and all that. There's a lot to like about the film, I will say for sure. I think it's because of some of the frustration on what it's lacking that I think that's why we focus so much on it. But I think clearly this is not a hating episode like Matt was saying about that movie. There's so much to like, at least for me, about this movie that I think is overall, I think I'm praising the movie and what Zack did. It's high, as Millennial Mike was saying, probably one of the better streaming movies out there. It's better than average to what you are seeing now in cinema. So I'd still be okay calling it cinema.
Best case scenario is that the right people hear this and they actually make the changes that they need to make. Like they actually take the criticism. You know what I'm saying? Like that'll be the best scenario. They need to not do the PG-13 version.
Right.
They need to stop. Or if they've already made the second one and they do well enough to excuse a third one, this is something that we might be able to think about a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm running you over, but maybe what they could do is they could push a hard PG-13 that includes as much as Zack Snyder's vision as possible while keeping the rating, if that's what Netflix must have. Or they can just bite the bullet and take a risk on a R-rated version and make that the only version and put all the advertising, or at least most of the advertising, behind that.
As far as
I agree, that's what should be. I agree.
And as far as fearing of like if we're running over or anything like that, if anyone's hearing this, then you're definitely hearing the Daniel cut of this podcast and not the Netflix cut.
We're being a little self-indulgent right now. Yeah, I can talk about Snyder literally forever because I love that guy and I wish the best for him. And I love his work, and I hope that good things happen for him.
Well, when the Snyder Cut comes out for Rebel Moon, Matt was saying he was down for it. When it comes out and we find that maybe there is enough to discuss based on the extra hour, and I think 20 minutes is what it ended up being of content. Do you guys want to do another episode just on the Snyder Cut of that?
100%.
Absolutely. I think there was enough diversity in opinion here that we absolutely need to do this again for the full version.
I'm desperate to redeem myself. I really would be like, oh man, it was all just a bad dream.
Yeah, I don't want Zack to fail, but I'm also gonna call out something that's not good.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, that's a verbal commitment at least, and hopefully there is enough there to warrant that extra review on its own, or the real review of real Rebel Moon, I guess, is what it will end up being. Well, guys, thank you so much for reviewing the Netflix edition of Rebel Moon. Millennial Mike, please let them know where they can find you if they want to continue the conversation, including your Substack and your other podcast.
Yeah, you can find me at Millennial Mike on Substack. You can find me on, of course, the Discords. That's going to be Reason I Broke Discord, Lazy Gaming Guys Discord, the Exiles Network Discord. That's it. I'm very peacefully on those platforms, and that's it. And I watch YouTube, and I might get into YouTube later, but I don't know. I'm just chilling. And
how about you, Matt?
Somewhat. I mean, kind of on more scrolling on Instagram at madner.com. That's spelled out DOTCOM. And then Facebook.com/Madner. Really, my social media involvement's been a whole lot less and lessening, especially over the last couple of months. You know, if you want to talk about it and you didn't hear enough, you can find me there.
Yeah, it seems to be a theme with a lot of co-hosts too, where they're like, yeah, I'm not really, I pulled back on X, like Maceo completely cut off, except for Discord. So I will say the best spot, I think, still is Discord, of course, and then DMing us. If you are following us on these accounts, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, shoot us a DM, or again, on our Discord lounge, you can find us, most of us, on there. But thank you guys once again for joining us. Another thanks to Millennial Mike and Matt, and hopefully we can all three of us can get together again for the extended edition. I've been Daniel, joined by Matt and Millennial Mike, and Brokehead Core. All will be well. Who is your favorite character out of this group of rebels, and why? So we'll start off Millennial Mike. Why is it Nemesis?
Dude, okay, that's scary.
Like a book, man.
That is funny. I'm genuinely I feel so vulnerable and exposed.
You're like a peeled banana.
because I loved Katana, and I really wanted an Ayer cut, and that never happened. And I'm just, and then I found Nemesis, and she's got two katanas, and they're glowing red, and they're so cool. And the design is so, it's like something that I would have done, you know? So yeah, it's so sick. It's so hard. It's so hardcore, man.
Very good. And how about you, Matt?
Probably toss up between the General, just because it's basically a sci-fi fantasy version of his character from Gladiator, and Jimmy.
Oh my God, Jimmy was awesome. Good picks, man.
That's how good the character was. Like it didn't give you too much. It left you with a little teaser at the end there of like, why has he got fucking deer horns like he's an extra in Yellow Jacket? Like I definitely want to know more about that robot. And I think Nemesis is cool, but definitely Jimmy and the General are the most interesting to me at this point.
Yeah, you stole my picks, man. I really like, because we know so little about, we get background on each of them, like General Titus, how he feels so much guilt over his crew. And it's like, I want to see that story told, and I hope they do tell it. And then Jimmy, same thing, fascinating character design, great character voice. And his potential is enormous for the sequel and for the violence that he could wreak upon these. Like when he looked back at Marcus when he shot him initially, and he looks back at him real fast, I'm like, oh, there could have been some violence there, but his programming won't let him. So
he's the heart of the, he kind of feels like he's the heart.
Yeah.
And Blood Axe is a close, like that was almost like my tie between those, because I really like Ray Fisher's character in there. And it might change by part 2, though. Who knows? But for now, yeah, great picks, guys.